Welcome to Scoop, where you get the scoop on this week's news. My name is Jenna, and this is Smarter News. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Scoop. It's the scoop for Monday, October 27th. It is the final scoop for the month of October, which feels like it went by so fast. And I know we say that all the time, that time keeps on moving faster than ever before, but it really does feel that way, doesn't it? We're a few days out from Halloween, and I asked our live audience here, I asked our insiders that are joining us live on the chat for this broadcast about how they felt about Halloween in general, dressing up. You know, we had kind of a lukewarm response. We have some people that really like a costume, others that do not. I'm in the do not category. I am in the reluctant dresser upper. My husband, on the other hand, likes a good costume party. So, you know, he kind of tries to arrange sneaky costumes for me to get me on board. I'll let you know how it turns out. I don't know. Let's just see where we are on Friday. I feel like there's a lot that can happen between now and then. A very fun question, though, I asked our insiders is what Halloween candy will you be stealing from either your children or from what you're going to distribute? Because it is that little permission to eat the candy that you wouldn't otherwise eat. The winner, hands down, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. Hands down the winner. We got Snickers. We got one Baby Ruth. We got some Milky Ways. But Reese's Peanut Butter Cups or pumpkin peanut butter cups, is that what it is? Those are the winners. I'm into Twix. I like the little tiny mini Twix that make you feel like you're not really eating a candy bar, but if you eat 3 of them, basically you're eating at least one half of the Twix bar. I don't know. It's however you want to do it, right? You just got to give yourself that little permission to do the thing that you wouldn't normally do. And good to note, Halloween is on a Friday this year. That should make it a little easier for teachers. Bless them this time of year when they're trying to keep their kids in school. Though quite a few schools in our area don't have school on Friday. My kids do. Good luck to the teachers on that day. But at least on Friday night, you have Halloween without school the next day, which is always a rough turnaround. That said, I feel this is a mom in me. You know, I'm going to come out and I'm going to say it. It's this time of year that we start seeing traffic accidents, especially with it being darker earlier. And we got the time change also coming this weekend. So words to the wise, especially during that commute home period, we all got to be really, really careful if we're walking on the streets or we're driving in a car. And that is the one little fear about Halloween on a Friday night is that it gives the permission for the party to go a lot later for everybody. So because I love you, and I love serving news to you on a regular basis. I like delivering the news. I want you to be healthy, happy, have a great time. And this is your mother talking, so just be careful. All right, outside my window here, I have a project ongoing, so you may hear a drill now and then. So I just want to give you a heads up. So far, it's been okay on this microphone, but you never know. What are we doing at the house again? I always have adventures at the house. The house is an adventure. Home ownership is an adventure. I've always basically rented my entire life until we moved to Texas. So this is all new to me, but we need to have all of our windows replaced. We knew that moving into this house, we've waited years. We have to do it before the winter. It's at the point that if there's a bad storm, all the windows shake in the house, like real bad. They're all compromised. They're all fogging up. It's not a good scene. So we need to get it done. So if you hear some drilling, that's actually what's happening. But I did have a sobering moment because yes, I'm preparing for the winter and storms and keeping the house safe and making sure the windows are safe and making sure my family is warm and especially making sure to conserve energy also in the summer when we need air conditioning all the time. But it's nothing compared to what the people in the Caribbean are going to be probably experiencing over the next 24 hours. And I just want to give you a heads up on this. Oftentimes we don't get a lot of news on storms when those storms are not hitting the United States of America. And for obvious reasons, we're going to put those most relevant storm systems on your radar, no pun intended, when we need to. But this is a unique storm. This is Hurricane Melissa, and it looks like it's going right over the top of Jamaica. In fact, I have a sort of an interesting radar scene that I'd like to show you. This is from our friend Ben Knoll over at the Washington Post. He was so helpful to us during the storms in Texas, the flooding that happened in Texas. And what you're seeing on your screen here is Hurricane Melissa. And what's important about Hurricane Melissa is that it's a Category 5 storm. So it is a big storm. And Category 5 is the speed of the wind. So when we're talking about hurricanes, oftentimes we're talking Cat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that corresponds to the strength of the wind speed. So when you get Category 5, you're looking at a speed of wind of 157 miles per hour or greater. And typically, Category 5 storms are rare, but not this season. And although we haven't seen landfall significantly in the United States, this season has been historic for a few different reasons when it comes to Category 5 hurricanes. So we've seen the most Category 5 hurricanes in one season since in the last 20 years. This is the last and only other Atlantic hurricane season with at least 3 Category 5 hurricanes was the record smashing 2005 season. And that year was Emily, Katrina, Rita, and Wilma. Each attained Category 5 status, the most of any single year. So this is a year where we're seeing multiple Category 5 storms. They're very powerful. And also, a word of caution, yes, the Category 5 storms focus on wind speed, but we know that it's storm surge and flooding that can be the most dangerous. Right now, by the way, I was reading from the Weather Channel there. So I always like to source myself, reading from some of their statistics. Kind of a byproduct of, not kind of, a byproduct of the government shutdown is a lot of our sources, whether it's NOAA or the National Weather Service, are not actively posting because their employees are furloughed. Many of their employees are furloughed. So we're getting our information from a few different places that are a little bit atypical. The Washington Post here and Ben Knoll, their chief meteorologist, and also the Weather Channel. But this is something just to keep an eye on. And again, not necessarily our closest community affected, but the island of Jamaica is certainly affected, and it looks like this storm will then push into the ocean and not necessarily come back to the coastal United States. But it's something that we're keeping an eye on. And also, it's a reminder that hurricane season does last to the end of November. So it starts June 1, lasts until the end of November. Mother Nature doesn't check with us in our calendars. So sometimes you can get a hurricane outside of that. But typically, this is when you're looking for hurricanes. And this time of the year can be a little bit tricky because we're moving on to winter storms, aren't we? So it's easy to maybe not pay attention. So I just wanted to put that on your radar as well. So here I am, thinking about my house getting the windows put in, and I'm thinking about those families in Jamaica that are probably wondering what is their way of staying safe right now. And I'm going to keep them in mind at least over the next 24, 48 hours when the storm is going through. And so encourage you to do the same. A couple other things that I just want to update you on. We do have an arrest, and the French have been a little bit mysterious about all of this. Just as an aside, typically we're going to be like, this is how many arrests we've made. It's the reports are suggesting 2 people arrested, but the earlier reports were not suggesting a number. And there's a question about how many suspects they're looking for. Bottom line is there's been an arrest or arrests in this case regarding the jewelry stolen from the Louvre Museum. And it appears that DNA found on the scene was matched to individuals who were arrested as they were trying to flee the country. This is what is the information that we're getting, but we still don't have a lot because apparently the jewelry is not found and other suspects are still at large, but maybe some progress there. So I wanted to give you a heads up on that. Also, a story that really became bigger over the weekend and may not be a story that affects all of us, but I thought it was a really interesting story for anyone that uses these makeup remover wipes. And you may say, I don't use makeup remover wipes, Jenna, but hold on. There's actually a story to this, okay? And it's an interesting story as well with how news is broadcast and how it's shared. So I want to take you behind the scenes a little bit. What you're seeing on your screen is a Neutrogena makeup remover pack. There's 2 packs that each have 25 makeup remover wipes in it. They're in this blue container that's very well recognized. This brand of Neutrogena is very well recognized. I've used these before. I had friends asking me about it as well. Wait, what is this all about? So there was a bacteria that was found in this particular wipe. And I'm going to try to pronounce it. And let's just hope for the best. Plural Libacter Degovia. I have no idea if that's correct. However, if you see something that sounds like that, just know it is a bacteria that apparently is present, can be present in cosmetic items. And apparently the FDA found it present, or there was an inspection that found this present in a group of these makeup remover wipes. These wipes went to Texas, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. So if you're in those states and you use this product, just a heads up on this. This bacteria is not necessarily dangerous. To a healthy person, it's unlikely that you're going to get symptoms from it, but you are using these makeup removers on your eyes. So, it's something you want to protect. People that apparently are immunocompromised, have chronic conditions, they can have a reaction to this bacteria. That reaction can include things like a respiratory disease, eye infections, or even sepsis. So it's not something to mess around with. As I did some research over the weekend, I found that there is some growing concern about finding this bacteria in some cosmetic products. So sort of like news to use, news to know in case you ever see it again. What was interesting about this story is I reached out to Kenvue. So that's Kenvue. You may remember Kenvue because what else does Kenvue make? Tylenol. So we've just talked about this company. I reached out to them over the weekend because I noticed that a lot of different media organizations were using different pictures for this product because this particular makeup remover, not to get too far down this road, comes in a lot of different forms, a lot of different packet sizes. And so news organizations were throwing up all sorts of different images that as I looked at what was actually supplied by the FDA didn't match. So I reached out to the company and said, hey, like we need the accurate picture here. What I showed you is what the company sent us. What we have up on our Instagram account now and what's up on our website is going to be the most accurate photo, but that's the easiest way to recognize it rather than looking for serial number on the product. And I was sort of amazed at how many different images for this one item were being shown by all sorts of different news groups. Unfortunately, Kenvue, it took about 48 hours to get back to us, 36 hours. That's a lifetime in news. And it's a great reminder that we do have to check sometimes what we see. I'm using this as an example because we get other recalls, other outbreaks, things I want to give you a heads up on. And it's a reminder that you got to really check the images to make sure it's accurately represented. So just a heads up on that, especially if you in these particular states. And we'll see if this recall gets a little bit bigger because this is a product that is widely sold and widely used. The FDA website is not active as well. You're noticing a pattern, right? National Weather Service. We're not seeing these actively updated. So I couldn't go to the FDA and say, hey, where's the image for this? Because it was just something that was filed sort of kind of tucked away, not necessarily in all their press releases, because this is a recall that happened. The recalls are also, you got to be very careful with the language. Most of the time, the recall is by the company. The company is doing it voluntarily. It, whatever was flagged could either be flagged by the FDA, by inspectors, flagged by something internal. And if it is the government flagging a company to a problem, the government gives the company the opportunity to have a voluntary recall. It's very rare that you see a forced recall because the company certainly doesn't want something that could be dangerous to people on the market. And so you seldom see the government and the company on different pages. But that's why you typically see the words voluntary recall. It's because the company is given the opportunity to alert the consumer and try to make it right. As I was poking around on the FDA website, one other story I just want to flag for you because I was sort of seeing what is updated. We've talked about the screw worm over the last couple months, just periodically as we get warnings about this. Remember, this is a parasitic fly that can be really, really dangerous to livestock. So much so that there is an alert by the agriculture department here in the United States. They're tracking where they're finding these flies and how close they're getting to the border. It's very serious. So the FDA has preliminary approved some treatment for dogs. So if you're on a border state, there's a preliminary sort of experimental treatment that's approved for dogs and also one for cattle. So they're trying to move in this direction to protect animals because the way that we've learned about this in the past, if this spreads, it can spread very quickly and damage livestock very quickly. That affects not only farmers and ranchers, but food supply in the United States. In the past, the way that we have combated this and got it out of the United States is by releasing sterile male flies. Hope I have that correct. Male flies, yes. And that way, as the flies couldn't reproduce. And that's the way we combated it. But whether or not that's going to be effective this time or how we're going to approach it this time in a new novel way a few decades later, that's a big question. I just want to put that, there's one of those stories that keeps on coming up. And I had that feeling, sort of like the bird flu, that suddenly it becomes a really big story. And I just want to, again, put that on your radar. So a couple of that, just little housekeeping items. I want to give you a heads up on that. Final housekeeping item is this. Are you guys watching the World Series? Is anyone watching the World Series? And a little baseball. I was sitting there watching the World Series, and I had this moment where I was like, why is a Canadian team in the World Series? Like, it's an American league. How did that happen? Turns out there's a little bit of a backstory to this, that the Major League Baseball wanted to have an even number of teams in the American League. And they had to give Seattle another chance to field a team. Apparently, it was tough going in Seattle. And when they did that, they were only going to have 13 teams, so they needed an even number. And so they went to Toronto and said there was a group of business people in Toronto that wanted to have a baseball team. And this is how Toronto got a team. So we have the Toronto Blue Jays against the Los Angeles Dodgers. The series is 1-1. So a lot of good baseball apparently being played. I enjoyed watching it for a little bit. And at the time that I was watching it, just by chance, the controversial commercial came on that even the White House is talking about. Have you heard about this? So apparently Ontario put together a commercial that was critical of President Trump's tariff policies. As we know, the relationship with Canada, one of our top trading partners, has been fraught, as it has been with Mexico, as the White House has tried to negotiate different types of trade deals and policies. So Ontario puts together this ad using Ronald Reagan's voice. In fact, I have it for you, so I can play a little bit of it so you can get a sound. This is, again, from the government of Ontario. It's not a national campaign. I wonder what sort of phone calls were taking place after this started airing. But take a listen to this just for a second.
When someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs.
Okay, so I mean, that doesn't sound good, right? So it's a former Republican president that is talking about trade policies that are critical for the Trump administration. So the White House doesn't like this. President Trump doesn't like this. He says we're putting tariffs back on Canada. This ad needs to be yanked, yada, yada, yada. The yada, yada, yada part is not the technical part of diplomacy, but I think you catch my drift. So there's a lot of back and forth on this. What is interesting about this ad is it is sampling from Ronald Reagan's radio address to the American public when he was talking about a particular time in the economy. He was advocating in general for a free market and not having tariffs. But he was trying to explain why he was using tariffs at this time as part of negotiations. So it is taking a sample of the speech, not using it exactly in the way that it was used at the time. It is a 5-minute address by President Reagan, and interesting to watch just for the sake of seeing how the president was communicating with the American people. He's sitting in this kind of vintage room. It wasn't vintage at the time, speaking, reading from a statement about this particular slice of economic negotiation that was taking place. So yes, President Reagan wasn't for using tariffs as he sounded in this commercial, but he was using them in this situation. So this sets us up nicely for what's happening this week and where the White House is going to be focused. Because right now, President Trump is traveling in Asia. He's going to be there really through probably early Thursday, our time. He's going to be back at the White House for the Halloween celebration that apparently is taking place on Thursday night. I was double checking that. So Thursday, October 30th, the First Lady and President Trump are going to be at the South Lawn of the White House for trick-or-treaters of all ages. So just a heads up, if you're in, I don't know what it takes to get that ticket. but they're going to be at the South Lawn if you're looking for a Twix like I am on that night. So we expect the president to be back at the White House on Thursday night. But Thursday during the day in Asia, which is quite a few hours ahead of us, he's going to be meeting with President Xi of China. And the administration has suggested they're trying to posture going into this meeting. They expect to have a good meeting, and they're looking for some good negotiations to take place. And we'll see what actually comes out of it. But this is why President Trump is in Asia. He's looking at these different trade relations. He's meeting with different leaders. He was just in Japan, Malaysia. So he's spending a lot of time overseas this week. And this is running parallel to the government shutdown, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. In fact, the Secretary of Treasury, who was on all the Sunday shows, so this happens, an administration will make someone available. And then the different networks have access to this cabinet member for specific big news events like this trip. And so Secretary Bessent was asked about a whole host of different things about what's going on with China. What do we think about these trade deals? But he was also asked about the government shutdown. And I want you to hear what he has to say.
I don't know what good it does to summon him to the White House. This is a Democratic-led boycott. And I'm just not sure what they're doing. What's changed between now and March other than Chuck Schumer's poll numbers? And I think Hakeem Jeffries is now going to be primaried from the left. And I didn't think there was a lot of room over there. So both of them are worried about their primaries and not the American people, not the government employees, not our military employees, because we were able to pay the military employees from excess funds at the Pentagon middle of this month. I think we'll be able to pay them beginning in November, but by November 15th, our troops and service members who are willing to risk their lives aren't going to be able to get paid. What an embarrassment.
So that's Secretary Bessent talking from the position of the administration about this government shutdown that's continuing to this day. So we're at day 27 of the government shutdown. We are now in historic territory. This is the second longest shutdown that we've seen of its kind since 1980. And if we get to next week, so if we go another 7 days, we will be very close to the longest government shutdown in history. So another 7 days, we're there. 34 days, 34, 35 days, depending on how you count it, is the record for a government shutdown. So right now, the big headline from this shutdown is nothing notable, no progress that we're seeing. We're seeing more politicians talking about it through the media, but not necessarily seeing a pathway to progress, at least early on a Monday. That can change at any moment, as you know. But we're still in that place where you have the administration of Republicans saying exactly what Secretary Bessent said, which is we're just trying to temporarily fund the government till about mid-November, and we can have these negotiations on the side, but we're not going to hold up funding the government for this very specific topic. Democrats feel like this specific topic is important to the American people and certainly important to their platform. So I want you to hear from the minority leader. He's the highest ranking Democrat in the House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries, and he is the representative from New York. So he speaks for Democrats. Well, we're looking for a Democrat leader to speak on this issue. He's going to be the one in the House, and Senator Schumer is going to be the one in the Senate for the most part. And so he was asked, and you're going to hear Margaret Brennan here ask him a question and say, why is this worth it? And I want you to hear what his response is right now. She has just listed, to give you a little context, listed some of the effects of the government shutdown. So you're going to hear her question.
This pain is real now. So is there a point at which it becomes too great to justify continuing the shutdown?
Well, there is an urgent need to reopen the government, which is why we continue to demand that Republicans sit at the negotiating table so we can enact a spending agreement that's bipartisan in nature. That's what we've called for from the very beginning.
But the Republicans are saying they won't do that until you pass the funding bill, the clean funding bill that already passed the House. Why can't Democrats in the Senate get on board with that?
Well, we've made clear, and I'm thankful for the leadership of Chuck Schumer and Senate Democrats, that we will not going to support a partisan Republican spending bill that continues to gut the health care of the American people.
So let's just pull way back out, because these are all important topics. Government funding is an important topic. We have a bunch of federal workers that are being impacted by this. And as the days move on, they're not getting paid. Some of them will be, by law, will get back pay. But if you're a government contractor, you may not. And some are taught that's kind of another side story where if you're a government contractor, what's owed to you, what's not owed to you, even if you're you could be a government contractor full-time for years, but where do you fall under that umbrella? Big question. So I actually asked someone live on our chat. So Tara's talking to us a little bit about her husband, who is a full-time federal employee who's not getting paid right now, and talking to us a little bit about the impact on her family. This is very real for people. This isn't something that's just political posturing, but it can feel that way when we watch lawmakers talk about it. So I do want to make sure that we're being very even with our approach here, because depending on what news source you're looking at, you can get slightly a different lens. Republicans say that they're not willing to negotiate this. They just want a temporary funding bill that does nothing, doesn't change spending in any way. They just want to continue this temporary Band-Aid for a couple weeks. This has been done in the past. It was done earlier this year. It's been used by Democrats and Republicans for years. Both Democrats and Republicans have balked on temporary funding and tried to prevent it at different times. But in this moment, at least in this year, we have seen lawmakers come together to vote for temporary funding to keep the government open and working. It is also true, though, that this question about healthcare spending is a big one. And yes, they could have temporary funding, but we could get to the end of the year and be exactly in the same situation where another temporary bill needs to be passed to get us to January, get us to March, or get us to next May, and keep on moving the chains, if you will, kind of like a football game. You're moving it down the field. You're kind of moving it, but you're not really changing. There's not really progress on any topics. Democrats are worried about this because they think this issue regarding healthcare is a really fundamental one. And you can hear them talking about affordability. What they're saying is Americans are paying more than ever for a lot of different items. And for healthcare specifically, this is an issue that they want addressed. But it is a specific issue too. This is for healthcare and health insurance through the Affordable Care Act. So zoom way out. I was just looking at some statistics, and these can be a little funny, but in general, more than 90% of the American public have insurance of some sort, whether that's through the government directly, Medicaid, Medicare, something like that, or through private insurance. The Affordable Care Act is a portal that allows someone to buy into the private insurance market, but it also has subsidies to try to keep those costs lower for folks of a certain income bracket. So it's not everybody that shops through the Affordable Care Act portal. It's a specific group of Americans. And so we were trying to parse this a little bit. It's looking like about 25 million Americans access the Affordable Care Act. How they access these subsidies that are in question is another sort of layer that we can look at. Subsidies are the use of government funds to try to lower a cost of a good or a service. And this can be done for a lot of different items. We can see the government sort of step in. We're going to keep this American product competitive. And in order to do so, we're going to offer a subsidy that is helpful for this American company or helpful for this American consumer. The one thing I caution about the word subsidy, whether it's being used by a Democrat or a Republican, is this is not some magical money coming from somewhere else. This is your taxpayer money that they are then using as a subsidy. So let's say you're getting a subsidized insurance through the healthcare portal, and you're like, man, I need that subsidy so that I'm not paying as much as I would every month. That's one of the ways the subsidies work here through the Affordable Care Act. They can lower your cost every month for healthcare, or they can lower your costs if you actually have to pay for a service. There's a few different ways that the subsidies can work for a taxpayer and work in general in this marketplace. And so it is taxpayer money, though, that is being used to do that. So you may not feel like that's your money because you're paying less for healthcare, but it was your parents' money and your grandparents' money and your money that you paid in taxes to the government. The government is using your taxes in that way. So it sort of feels sometimes when we're talking about subsidies, we're talking about things that the government's doing, like, oh, there's like some magical pot somewhere that of gold that is then being used for the US economy. No, that's your money, and it's being used in this particular way. And that's why there's some questions about, well, okay, so is this standoff? Democrats want these subsidies locked in. They want to know, what can they tell this particular group of Americans about what they're going to pay? There's less pressure, one can argue, that Republicans are feeling, because it's 25 million Americans and a portion of those 25 million Americans. And Republicans are taking the stance that that's not necessarily enough. I'm just sort of summarizing here, to feel the political pressure that they have to do something. So Democrats feel like this is really important. This is a principle that they're going to stand on politically and also economically. Republicans are saying, wait a minute, this does not rise to that level to shut down the government. And so whose rights? What does that look like? Sort of up to, whoever's listening to this. How do you feel about this government shutdown being on this principal issue? Because for Democrats, it is this issue. They want the subsidies locked in. And Republicans are saying, we're happy to talk about the subsidies, but we got to keep the government funding. We're not going to, the way that they're saying is being held hostage on this particular issue. Who wins in this is a question that I've asked, because the hope would be that the winner is the American people, rather than looking at it as a win for Republican or Democrats. But it looks like that's still the way that this story is being talked about. And I have a question for you about when, do you see the political pressure rising on politicians to do something here? Or is it still so narrowly impacted? We're talking about a huge group of federal workers, but the majority of the country does not work for the federal government. So when's the tipping point that it starts affecting other people? I hate to say this out loud, because I would not want to see a government shutdown this long. But we got Thanksgiving coming up. That's a huge travel period. Could we see a government shutdown go that long? We're going to run into the territory for where that temporary funding bill would have kept the government open. So that travel corridor of Thanksgiving is really important. And at that point, you have less TSA people showing up for this potential, less TSA people showing up for work, air traffic controllers, people are exhausted. They're not getting paid. They're being asked to come in. I mean, as time goes on, the chances of higher disruptions go up. What moves Republicans or Democrats? I don't know. Let me take a look at what you guys are saying here. Because it is, the question of healthcare in America is a big one for everybody, isn't it? I don't know one person that's like, wow, I really love my healthcare. My healthcare is awesome. I know exactly what to expect. I know what I'm going to pay all the time. 2 thumbs up. I rarely hear that. But I'm looking here at some of what's being said on a chat. Kimberly, I'm sorry, is saying, is there anything we can do as citizens? People don't think that calling your representatives or calling their offices matter. It does matter, because when they see that the citizens are engaged on whatever your opinion is, they're more likely to move. I have someone on the chat saying, my daughter was a government contractor and lost her contract. Her husband is active duty military. Like this is real things. And also the broader economic impact is coming into play here, because at the end of the year, this is when a lot of companies are going to make their money, November, December, because of the Christmas holiday shopping season. You got less money to spend. That can have a real effect on the economy, even if it is a smaller, I'm putting air quotes for those of you listening on podcast, a smaller group of Americans. So there's, what changes this is a big question right now. And who's right is really a matter of perspective. I wish I had more information for you, but I really thinking about, like, I had that moment this morning, like, how does subsidies actually work here? Who's getting paid? The companies are setting whatever they're charging, they're setting. And they're setting those charges knowing that subsidies are going to bring down the cost for individuals. This is one of the arguments against subsidies, because the critics of this will say, well, it manufactures something artificial happening in the marketplace, because companies know they're going to get a certain amount, that, the taxpayer doesn't have to pay quite as much, so they can charge X amount because some of it's going to be paid, and it's not a totally free market. For those that are advocates of these subsidies are saying, yeah, but let's say on a global stage, we're up against, communist nations like China that are setting prices, getting cheap labor, and flooding the market with their goods. So if we don't subsidize certain things, then we can't even compete. So there's pretty interesting arguments on both sides for government subsidies. And sometimes it's not, a black and white issue. But we're going to look at this related to healthcare in America. And, we'll let's see. There is a question. I'm seeing Barbara too on the chat saying, I'm looking for leaders. And if they are there, I'm not seeing them. It's a really interesting statement, Barbara, because that's one of the arguments for the president to get involved. Like, okay, the president's not working out this deal, but it has to do with lawmakers and votes in Congress and all the things. But who's going to stand up here and say, we're going to be locked in this room until we figure this out? Is there someone that can do that and influence people for the greater good of the United States, which at this point is a government that's open? I mean, already in this broadcast, look at all the places I've mentioned that I can't access information, whether it's about the weather, whether it's about something related to recall that could potentially be dangerous for Americans. We also have something up on the government website regarding food stamps and SNAP benefits and those running out as we get into November. So this has the potential really to tilt into an even bigger story. And really, it's this week that we're seeing that, because the stakes are really going up as we go into November. It's not just about history making and all of that. It's about the effects really extending past another pay period and into this range where it's affecting Americans that are not federal workers that are collecting some of these benefits. So definitely a story to watch, and we'll see what happens when the president gets back from Asia, if there is an opening to maybe bring some lawmakers together and whether or not that's effective. Okay, another big story to watch this week as we continue to watch the government shutdown is what's going on with the United States targeting what the White House is calling narco terrorists. Others don't agree with this. And this is what we're seeing a lot of video of different boats being targeted off the coast of Venezuela. The US government, the Pentagon, says these are criminals, these are terrorists. Remember, the Trump administration has named these different cartels, which were previously cartels, for the last several decades, are now terrorist organizations. They have a new designation. Because of that, there's a little extra room for efforts to prevent these groups from operating in the United States. Efforts is a very generic term, and I realize that. But whether or not we're talking about sanctions or trade, whatever we're talking, there's a lot more leniency to activate against a terrorist group than it would be a cartel, an organized crime group. So I want you to listen to this. Kristen Welker is asking Senator Ruben Gallego, just a little background on him. He was a Marine. He deployed to Iraq. So he's going to talk a little bit about his military service vaguely here, but I want you to know that he has that background. And what we're going to start with here is some sound that Meet the Press, NBC's Meet the Press, is airing as Kristen Welker, the anchor here, is going to ask Senator Gallego a question. This brief sound from the president made a lot of news last week. So I wanted you to hear it too.
I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay? We're going to kill them. They're going to be like dead.
The Trump administration insists these strikes are consistent with international law. Do you agree with that?
No, it's murder. It's very simple. If this president feels that they're doing something illegally, then he should be using the Coast Guard. If there's an act of war, then you use our military, and then you come and talk to us first. But this is murder. It's sanctioned murder that he is doing that. And it's very simple for someone like him to talk about killing people or doing something in the name of war. He's never actually served. He's never actually pulled a trigger. And it's very dangerous what he's doing, both to our international relations, to our friends down in South America, and to these men and women that have to make these calls for a president who has zero understanding about the responsibility someone has when it comes to having to make life and death decisions. It's disgusting what he's doing.
So Senator Gallego is very critical, obviously, of what the president is doing. Senator Rand Paul, a Republican, is critical of what the president is doing, targeting people in this particular way without any sort of due process, if you will. Senator Paul has been critical in the past of that, whether it's a terrorist organization that exists here in the United States or is abroad, because certainly the United States has targeted terrorists through drone attacks or more provocative raids like that of bin Laden in the past. So it's not like we haven't done this before, but we certainly haven't done it like this, taking out these particular boats and arguing that they're connected to the drug trade, where there are some that say, how do we know that? What is the intelligence telling us that? So Congress is asking for more information. Senator Lindsey Graham, who's been an advocate of the president, critical at times, but an advocate, a Republican from South Carolina, has a different take from Senator Gallego. He says that the president is going to brief Congress about this, and he also shared some really important information. I want you to listen to what he has to say for another point of view.
Here's what's new. You got a commander-in-chief that's not going to put up with this crap. We're not going to sit on the sidelines and watch boats full of drugs come to our country. We're going to blow them up and kill the people that want to poison America. And we're now going to expand operations, I think, to the land. So please be clear about what I'm saying today. President Donald Trump sees Venezuela and Colombia as direct threats to our country because they house narco-terrorist organizations. The leader of Venezuela is an indicted drug dealer in American courts. So, yeah, the game is changing when it comes to drug traffickers and drug cartels. We're going to use military force like we have in the past to protect our country. That's the new game we're playing, and I'm glad we're playing that game. And if I were Maduro, I'd find a way to leave before he goes down.
Okay, some provocative words there from Lindsey Graham. Let me show you this map where you can see Venezuela. Remember, getting to Venezuela, getting to Caracas is like 2.5 hours on a plane from Miami. I think sometimes we forget that. It feels very, very far away in South America, but it's not, at least by flight. When you look at a map and you see the whole thing, you're like, well, it's not really that far away. We have a guided missile destroyer just sitting at Trinidad and Tobago. It's an island just a few miles off the coast of Venezuela. We're doing training exercises. This is what the military says. We also know that there's been some ships off the coast of Venezuela where these operations are taking place. What Senator Graham was talking about are reports that we could see some of the action that's taken in the Caribbean Sea also taken on land in Venezuela. And just to put that in some perspective, again, we have attacked terrorist groups in Yemen, for example. We've used a drone to take out terrorists, Al-Qaeda terrorists in Yemen. Now that these drug cartels are officially foreign terrorist organizations, they're terrorist groups, could we see something like that in Venezuela? This is what raised those questions, especially with these designations. There's a cartel that's in Mexico or in Venezuela. Does that mean the U.S. military at any point can go in and take out these groups because the administration says that they're a threat to the national security of the United States of America? And the question is, are they an existential threat to the country? And there are those that say, absolutely, they're bringing drugs into the country that's hurting the American people, that we can't let that happen. Others would say, well, this is part of the drug trade. It's not exactly the same thing as a terrorist group like Al-Qaeda that doesn't believe America should exist. So are these the same things? I'll leave that up to you to decide. Right now, the designation is terrorist organizations. So this is why the military is able to make these moves and is doing so without a lot of resistance. The question is, what would that resistance look like? Could there be some sort of lawsuit filed? Like how would there be a change in this? Congress is responsible for authorization of war, but we've gone into all sorts of conflicts without an authorization of war. So is Venezuela creeping into that territory? And how big of a conflict is the United States government willing to get into? This is, again, a big story to watch specifically this week as tensions are rising. And we see that ship really off the coast of Venezuela parked there, just sort of hanging out, and with the question about what's next, and the president being overseas. By the way, the military exercises that this ship is part of are taking place when the president is in Asia and are supposed to finish up by Halloween, essentially. So just another quick look at that map. All right, final story I just want to touch on for you real quick here is what's going on with the White House, because there's a lot of buzz about what is happening or what did happen to the East Wing of the White House. And certainly there's a lot of different feelings about that. I will give you that for sure. Let me go ahead and pull up, if I can here. I have a few different things open on my tabs as per usual. I wanted to show you what this looks like through a really great article that I was reading through Town and Country, which tends to be a really good magazine. I mean, I think about it as a little bit like old school magazine, but has been good in the past for some of these overviews of, kind of American history and in a cultural setting. So let me go ahead and pull this up so you can see a few different images here of the White House for those of you watching live. And for those of you listening, I'm going to it's a great article. It's definitely worth the read. If you have a second over coffee this week, I'll make sure it's in the show notes. So let's talk a little bit about the East Wing, because we don't seldom talk a lot about the East Wing. There's a lot of talk about the West Wing, where all, the big offices are, and a famous television show. The East Wing is a little bit different. So when we think about the historic building of the White House, the original White House did not have kind of an East or West Wing per se. It was just the White House. Under Thomas Jefferson, there were two terraces that were built, East and West terraces. And those were in place kind of through the 1800s. Then they were taken down. And then when Teddy Roosevelt came into office in the 1900s, he rebuilt some of these terraces. And this is how we get this East and West footprint. But it really wasn't until FDR when we see the East Wing rise as an actual structure like we're talking about it now. And so that was about 80 years ago. It was around the time of World War II. And I've said this once, I'll say it again, but a lot of the stories that we're talking about, whether it's foreign policy related or otherwise, we can kind of go back to this post-World War II period where the United States was blooming as a international superpower for the first time, militarily and otherwise, diplomatically. We suddenly were in a new position. And so a lot of the decisions that were made in that period are being challenged now about 80 years later. So this East Wing is really important because it wasn't just about office space. It also was about a place to put some of the security that this White House at the time, that Franklin Roosevelt felt that needed to be put in place. And underneath the East Wing is the bunker that exists for the president and his team to go into if there's a security situation. So underneath that ground is something that's very important for security, not necessarily aesthetics or function. So the East Wing, as we knew it, as some office spaces for different teams, including that of the First Lady. Eleanor Roosevelt was really big about securing her role in the White House, and First Ladies have made a name for themselves in a few different ways. And this is where some of their offices were. There was also a fairly big room that could host about 200 people, but a lot of the state dinners that we've talked about, or state events where you have hundreds of people coming to the White House, were held under tents, and everything had to be brought in, because if you wanted a party for 500 people, 600 people, you would need a tent to be put up. You need to put down a floor. You have to bring in all the furniture. I mean, think about that. And it would be under a tent. So weather was a factor. Washington, D.C. is not the easiest place when it comes to weather. And that's the way it was done in the past. So yes, you had a bigger room in the East Wing, which is why when President Trump talked about using the East Wing and doing a renovation, I don't think it really dawned on anybody, me included, that he meant he was going to tear down the whole thing, which happened last week. So the demolition definitely caught people by surprise, because yes, he showed a plan for the East Wing, but the vision of, we're going to tear down everything and rebuild it wasn't exactly clear. And the White House will say, well, we talked about it. We talked about the renovations. I don't know if anyone really pictured in their mind what that would look like. And we can give everyone the benefit of the doubt on that. Maybe the press didn't ask the right questions. Maybe the White House didn't really want to talk about it. Maybe the plan changed. I mean, we know what remodeling and renovation is like. It can look a little different. Maybe it all changed. Who knows? But either way, this demolition took place, and there's a lot of strong opinions about it. It is important to note that the White House, along with several other buildings in DC, they're not underneath this umbrella of a certain type of preservation law that's required for others. And so there is some leniency for the president to make some calls. This is why we can see Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt talk about changes that they made to the White House at different times. And we've seen presidents do this. President Truman, President Kennedy. We've seen a lot of changes made at the White House. It just hasn't been quite this visible. So the historic context is important. The East Wing does not date back to when John Adams moved into the White House. He was the very first president to live in the White House. It doesn't date back to that. The idea of this footprint of an East and West terrace does date back to Thomas Jefferson, but it was torn down during the 1800s. And what's emerged as the East Wing is really something that we've seen over the last 80 years. So just to give you a little bit of that, because it's emotional. You're thinking about the people's house and how do you feel about the White House? It could be really emotional to think about that. So I think that matters. How it matters, I don't know. But I was curious to find that out. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I would have thought that the White House was just the White House. It's been that way for 200 years. So here we are. Apparently, the White House says they do have to go through a review process of some sort for what they build, what is actually going to emerge on top of this, which is supposed to be a ballroom that fits at least 650 people, plus the office spaces that would be renovated that were there. So there would be some office spaces, but a much bigger location for big state events, which is true. Multiple administrations have struggled with this, of not having space to hold large events for visitors or otherwise. So that's also a fact. Here's an interesting fact I'm going to leave you with. David Axelrod, top advisor to President Obama, told NPR back in 2010 he got a call from President Trump saying, hey, you guys need a ballroom. And apparently David Axelrod passed Donald Trump, the businessman and television star at the time, not the presidential candidate, was years before that, passed him off to somebody else. I was like, yeah, and David Axelrod said something to the effect like, the tents don't really bother me, like, yeah, it's not really a big deal. Apparently President Trump said, you should come down to Mar-a-Lago. We got a good facility. I'm going to show you a ballroom. So this conversation predated even President Trump's first administration. He saw it as a problem. He is a real estate developer. And the way David Axelrod tells the story, apparently with a little bit of regret, saying, well, maybe if we gave him a little bit more attention to this request, maybe if we brought him in to the fold a little bit, you don't wake up and see the East Wing, leveled. I don't know. That sounds like an interesting conversation. I'd love to hear that from David Axelrod himself. What was that call like? What has that happened? Does he get a call about someone being like, let me build you a ballroom? So I thought I actually do think that's really important context for the president to be thinking about that, going back 15 years. So it was on his mind, folks. It was on his mind. And what the structure looks like from here is a big question. But with everything shut down, I do wonder a little bit about that. There seems to be the suggestion that the review board for any of these projects would be people appointed by the president. There's also another commission that maybe is not fully appointed by so it's a little bit of a gray area about how this all goes. In the small town that I live in, to do even very minor things to property that has historic value, you have to go through all of these steps. It is not easy. In fact, it's a deterrent to development, quite frankly, because you have to work within such strict bounds. I'm sure a lot of you live in areas that are like that. If you're in San Francisco or New York City, there's a question about historical preservation, depending on what buildings there are. I don't know how much that parallels what's happening at the White House right now. It's sort of fascinating, sort of a fascinating thing to know about. So let's see what you guys are saying on the live chat. As someone that works in the construction industry, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with what's happening, but sometimes it's just less expensive to tear down and rebuild, especially with all the new technology. So the question I have with that, thank you for that comment, is about the security part. Caroline Leavitt was asked this question, the press secretary, what about the bunker? And apparently she said, well, that's involved in the plan, but that's not very specific. So I would assume, it's never safe to assume, as you know, that the bunker is still operable while this is happening, because otherwise you don't have one for the president. But is there another reason here about security that would make sense? I'm not offering this as an explanation, to explain away what the president is doing. I'm just curious about it. So yes, and Jan asked this question, did they need to get the review and approval? Apparently not for not demolition, Jan. That's what the White House says. They didn't have to do it, and now they're like, it's over. And this is the way the White House moves. They move decisively. They do things and they say, well, you could challenge it, but they're already moving. What some supporters will view as decisive leadership, others will view as bullying and chaotic. And you see that sort of in hypercolor here when we're talking about this particular issue, because the East Wing is gone. So whoever was going to challenge it, it's not like can't come back. And it was gone like that. So Yes, Tara's saying, I live in Boston. Do you know how much red tape we need to go through to make any changes to a building? This is what I'm talking about, Tara. I don't think it does exist in Washington, D.C. proper if you're part of the city, but the White House is in this different nook of law. And I don't know if any of us really know enough about it because we've never seen anything done like this. So I don't know. I don't know, y'all. I would have liked to know, like, okay, the roof was leaking and the electricity was bad. It was cold in the winter and there wasn't any insulation. And we all watch too much HGTV. We know who we want up there. We want to see the HGTV host that we love, like doing like a walkthrough. Oh yeah, that wall needs to come down. Look at that. That's hanging off the wall. We're going to need to fix that. Oh, this is going to be too, we got to take down that wall. Saka, well, look at this. The floor needs to go. So anyhow, it's, yeah, I know it's emotional. I think the context is interesting. I'll keep you posted about that. I know it's hard to see that sort of project. It's a multi-million-dollar project. It just sort of happens during a government shutdown when a lot of people are not able to collect a paycheck, and there's not the normal group in Washington, D.C., whether lawmakers or federal workers, that would be around to step in front of a microphone and say they don't like it. So also the timing of it, I find very interesting. Advantageous perhaps to the White House, or a disadvantage because it allowed the press to totally focus on it because nobody else was in town. So it could kind of slice both ways. All right. Well, I'll let you guys go. That's your scoop for this week. We got a lot of things to watch, and we'll continue to keep an eye on it and see where do we get any more news from the White House? Do we get any breakthrough through the congressional conversations about the shutdown? Where does that go from here? We see the leaders step in front of the microphone, but we're not getting a lot of, I'm at a little bit of a loss because I want to keep you updated, but I want to keep showing you the same thing. And quite frankly, the sound bites haven't really changed in the last 27 days. They're more or less the same. Both sides get gold stars for consistency and no stars at all for compromise because no one's reaching it right now. So more as we get it. And if you had any doubt about whether or not Christmas is here, I just want to also flag for you that the Rockefeller Christmas tree has been chosen. We're going to have that up on our website. And fascinating backstory to the Rock Center Christmas tree, which we'll talk a little bit more about. It's a little early. It is October, guys. I get it. But it is a tree that exists on different family properties over the years. And can you imagine having a tree of that size in your yard that gets cut down and brought to New York City? There's always a little bit of like an ouch with that, and also sort of an amazing tradition that dates back to the Great Depression and a time of economic hardship, where workers gathered in Rockefeller Center and ended up decorating a tree. So interesting backstory there, but we have the tree. Cue the music. If you want a little Christmas music, here's your permission. Let's get through Halloween first. All right, folks, stay safe out there. Get your candy, have some fun with your family. If you have any particular insights or personal experiences with the government shutdown, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us, hello@smarternews.com. Send us a voice note. We'd love to make sure that your voices are heard about what this is like for you. And these are very specific communities around Washington, D.C., most impacted. Not to say it's not nationwide, but we want to make sure that we get your voice woven into these stories, along with those that are elected to represent the American people. So have a great week wherever you are. And thank you for your support of quick, concise, nonpartisan, Smarter News. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you for believing in quick, concise, nonpartisan, Smarter News. Every time you join us or share or save our content, you help us build a solution in news. And we are so grateful. We have a few other ways you can support our mission, from joining our insider community scoop, to shopping our gear at our Smarter shop, to just telling a friend. The best way to do any of this is to visit smarternews.com or follow us at Smarter News on social media. Don't worry, we put all of this in the captions so it's easy for you. Plus, we added our email just in case you want to drop us a note. We always love hearing from you. Thank you for helping us deliver news smarter.